What's checking, everybody? It's another edition of the Orangebloods Modcast. I'm Jeff Ketchum, joined today by the Fab Four, Alex Dunlap, Jason Sukumo, Anwar Richardson, and then I'm like the spare change guy. But do us a favor, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. I won't do the hand gesture that I did yesterday with Anwar, or 2 days ago, that represented the hand gesture, but the ringing the bell. But look, we're here to talk about the aftermath, the continued aftermath of Texas's loss to Arkansas, and previewing what is suddenly a really interesting game this weekend against Rice. Fellas, and real quick, because technically the Modcast doesn't have a sponsor, but Rogue Apothecary sponsors my Thursday article, and Anwar's got the shirt on today. And we've all been talking about our favorite Rogue Apothecary products. And special shout out to Rogue Apothecary for being like going out of their way to be a terrific Orange Blood sponsor, like beyond just paying money and being, on time and all of that. They go out of their way to make sure that if we're in pain or if we need something to make us feel a little bit better during a week where I don't know about the rest of you guys. Sukumel, I remember, was it a year ago where everybody in your family was sick for a month nonstop?
Yeah, man, I forgot about that. But yeah, that sounds right. Just the flu kept recycling through all of us. Yeah.
Yeah, that's been me this week. Everybody in my house, other than my daughter, who's already been sick earlier this month. But yeah, brutal. Not as bad as Texas versus Arkansas. And guys, I almost don't even know where to begin this week. There's been a change at the quarterback position. The bet lives. Hey, listen, I needed to say that out loud. A week ago,
someone asked me, like, do I now lose the bet with Alex? I said, well, hey, Casey's still got to be a good quarterback. But I said, you know what? If Casey Thompson turns into a good college quarterback, and that means Orangebloods is happy, I said, I will gladly buy Alex lunch wherever the hell he wants.
It was all of us, by the way. All of us.
The whole group. I don't even remember.
It was all of us.
Jeff and I just piggybacked.
Oh, you guys are going to mooch off that bet. That's
and technically Dustin piggybacked on that. Oh. So you technically owe Dustin as well.
Those are the stakes. I mean, quitting Orangebloods does not mean that you still don't get grandfathered into the bet that you were in the very beginning.
Well, at this point, I hope Alex winds up being right, so we don't have to have repeats of last Saturday's game.
Well, I think we'll know what will register as not being a good quarterback after this weekend. I mean, if you lose your job, that'd probably be a good way of not winning the bet. Let's start with the quarterbacks. We can't, like, it's the elephant in the room. We can go back to the ugliness of Arkansas in a little bit. There's a part of me, Anwar and I did a Monday analysis on what happened, and then on Tuesday, we talked after we did a show here on the YouTube channel after Casey had spoken with the media. There's still a part of me, though, this will be the fourth day since we found out around lunchtime. There's still a part of me that's like, holy shit, man, they really did it. They switched quarterbacks after 2 games, including, Hudson Card had one of the best debut performances statistically of any quarterback in school history. And 2.5 quarters later, he doesn't have his job anymore. It's a weird, I know everybody feels like we make too much out of the quarterback deal, but Jason, you and I have been doing this together a long time. Like, it's not insignificant when there's a quarterback change. And I was trying to think about it earlier this week. Over the last 20 years or so, you can probably count on one hand the number of times we've seen in-season changes at the quarterback position, maybe a couple of more than that, but this isn't the type of thing that happens every year.
I can't even think of enough to fill 5 fingers. I mean, not counting injuries, of course. I mean, you have a much better recollection of history than I do, but it doesn't happen often. It certainly doesn't happen often we're a game and a half into the season, essentially. I'm still a little bewildered by it all. Like you said, Hudson Card comes out and turns in one of the best first performances of a starting quarterback that we've ever covered at the University of Texas in 20 years. And then he goes out against Arkansas and just can't seem to do much of anything right. And he didn't have help from the people around him, but I mean, there still were opportunities for Hudson Card to make plays. And He just misfired on a lot of passes. He hurts. I thought it was interesting to hear Sark say on Monday that he looked antsy in the pocket. And I didn't write it, but when he said that, I was like, oh my gosh, it's kind of been bumping around my head too. His footwork looked antsy, and I've seen that before from Hudson Card, even in other games where he's played well, or even going back to last year a little bit. He just seems a little bit antsy. I mean, maybe Sark needs to work on slowing the game down for him, calm him down. But yeah, it's to make that change 2.5 quarters into the second game of the season. And frankly, it should have happened earlier. I think the change, I put in my notes, I thought early in the second quarter last week, I was sitting here thinking, hey, make that change. But doesn't happen often, and you and Anwar covered, I'd watched y'all's post-game show, and I thought you brought up some really good points to say, for Sark to make that change, if he was, at this point, you were speculating, if he comes out Monday or this week and says, I'm making that change, he's basically admitting, hey, man, I had it all wrong. I had a month's worth of practices, and I got it wrong. And, kudos to Sark. He didn't waste any time, and he came out Monday and right off the top of his press conference before he's even asked, oh, by the way, is kind of nonchalant. Oh, by the way, Casey Thompson's going to be our
side note. I think
that's a side note. That's exactly what it is. As a side note, Casey Thompson's going to be our starting quarterback. Oh, okay. Maybe you should have led with that. But I think it's interesting on a lot of levels, including the way that Sark handled it. It kind of, like you said, that's Sark kind of in a weird kind of way throwing himself on the sword. Say, hey, I screwed up. I got it wrong. We're going to give Casey his shot as the starter, but. Rice isn't going to provide, on paper, Rice should not provide too tough of a test. I expect Casey Thompson will perform very well this week, and I'm fully anticipating it being his job moving forward. We'll see for how long, but I expect him to kind of take it and run with it starting this weekend.
Alex, you've gone back and graded the offensive line, counted all the snaps, done all of your deep dig work for the week. Sarkisian uses the word antsy to describe Card. If I were to give you a single word in your mind after doing the dig, what's your word for Card after rewatching the game?
I'm not the best with just stated simple. I don't know of a word. Antsy's probably good. I said in the column, he looked miserable. He didn't just play miserably. He looked miserable. He didn't look like he wanted to be there. That had a lot to do with the offensive line, of course. But to me, it wasn't that. Antsy, does that kind of go along with does Antsy sort of mean like you just won't let loose? You just won't let loose.
Nervous.
Coaching and it felt like he just.
Hesitant,
exactly. It seemed like he was constantly scared to trust his coaching and do what he needed to do. I know the offensive line was bad. I know they gave up a bunch of pressures. They certainly gave up some quarterback hits and some sacks. They were blocking down the wrong way on simple, really grade school concepts at times. But still, Hudson, there were times he bailed too often. He couldn't get through his reads. He couldn't progress. He couldn't process things. And it was just, I kept thinking, I'm like, what? How can this look so much different than last week when we came on this modcast and talked about, whoa, look how this dude just sits in that pocket and he can just create from it. It's like he's just, he's playing from the hip. He's playing loose. It was a complete 180. And I don't know if that's just, the speed of the Arkansas defense. They were faster than I thought. They were certainly a lot more attacking than I thought. They gave him looks that he wasn't expecting. And the wide receivers didn't do him much help with their ability to get open. I thought the scheme was bad. Sarkisian talks about how he scripts his first 15 plays of the game. And you go back and you look at the first 15 plays of the game, and it wasn't like there was anything, any coherent strategy that you could really pull out as to what they were trying to get done. So I think it was a confluence of factors, but I think when you think about what it has to come back to, he's still an inexperienced young quarterback in his first year as a starter, and maybe the stage was too big for him and things were too fast, and he kind of turtled up, man. And I don't think it's an indictment about his future, but I think it's probably an indictment about where he stands as far as his present.
Anwar, it's interesting. You and I have talked about this thing now, Saturday, Monday, Tuesday. There's a degree, I suppose, of which we've gone inside the quarterback discussion as much as the quarterback discussion can go in. If, because I thought when Card started 1 for 4, I think he was 1 for 4 for 25 yards, that ball to Xavier Worthy. I think that might have been it in the first quarter. They didn't get off a lot of pass attempts. They didn't have a lot of plays. If he benches Card then, maybe for a couple of series, Thompson comes in. Let's just say Thompson has a couple of touchdown drives, but Card's in a position where he does go back into the game later. Maybe he settles down. I don't, or maybe they stick with Thompson the entire way. And then
I think they would. Don't you? If you kind of get him cooking with some grease, you keep him in there. I would think. I don't know though. I don't know.
I guess the question wanted to ask Anwar: is there a way that Sarkisian handles this, like when he pulls Card? It got to be so bad by the end that you have a lot of people who watch this team now and say Card just needs to sit and watch. Would it have been any different if he'd gotten the hook earlier and the totality of the ugliness didn't stretch all the way to 33-7, or was even just a small peak? Could they, if it was just the first quarter, are we exactly where we are today, no matter what? Or is it a version of that where maybe people aren't quite as down as they are today with Card because it wasn't a real small sample size? It was enough that the game had been decided by the time he gets the hook.
Well, it's a fascinating question, mainly based on the premise that I maintained all off season. I thought Thompson should be the starter. So, so for me, I still would have maintained that Thompson should have started that game against Arkansas, and I felt like he should have been the day one starter versus Louisiana. So, the things that we saw are things that I expected to see from a young quarterback, which is why I always kept saying, like, they should go with Casey. I think Casey's a safer bet for so many, reasons. And we saw those reasons, right? We saw a young quarterback for, second start on the road, hostile environment. The things that happen are the things that we should have anticipated. So, what could you have benched him earlier? I mean, clearly should have benched him earlier, right? That's absolutely true. And you don't wait until the game is out of hand. Like, at that point, you've got to say, like, this is not about what I got to do for Hudson Cards, what I got to do for this team. Like, I've got to do what I can to get this team in the best position to win this particular game. Now, he's doing that going forward, and that's fine. And I've commended him on Twitter for doing that going forward. In the game, though, I think it was a tough situation for him. I thought it was, at the end of the day, Catch, I can't ignore that and I think I've said this before, that for probably, I don't know percentage, but probably about 90% of the offseason, Casey Thompson was the number one guy. Like, from January on, he was the number one guy. Spring, he was the number one guy. Summer, he was the number one guy. Starting out training camp, he was the number one guy. And then we had the switch at the very end, based off of what we talked about, what Thompson's ceiling could be, with never factoring in what his floor could actually be. So everything was like ceiling. Could it be a first round pick? Could it be the next Aaron Rodgers? Like ceiling. And no one's like, could he also play like a redshirt freshman? And that's what we saw was the floor. So, should he have done it earlier? Absolutely. But he's corrected it. I think he's righted the ship. I think he's made the right decision going forward. And then we'll see how Casey, reacts. As he said, like, his thought process was, once he gets the job, he's not going to relinquish it. He's not going to give it back. And so now we'll see. I think the right decision has finally been made. Now we'll see what Casey does with it.
I'll push back on that a little bit, Anwar, not to the totality of the point that you're making about the volume of reps as the one quarterback that Thompson had, because you're right, from offseason workouts through spring, all of spring football, which they didn't do what they did early in camp, which kind of 50-50 and really making a point to get Card snaps with the ones. I mean, Thompson really dominated the ones in the spring. And then he leads the offseason workouts. And then it was right after the first scrimmage when they made the change. And that ended up being about, I want to say like the fifth practice was the scrimmage. So the final breakdown over the course of the 15 workouts would have been like 9 for Card and 6 for Thompson. If I'm counting it right, I might be off by 1. But in the end, what's really interesting about this for me, and people are going to be like, oh, you're attacking Sark or you're nitpicking Sark. I don't know what I'm doing, but it can't completely go without saying that Sark had Card as the number 1 guy from essentially the 6th practice on, except for one practice, which was the one practice where he was going to complain about the framing of the quarterback position one day before he announced the starter. So he kind of decides in the second week of practice that Card's going to be the guy. But what was really interesting about that is there were workouts where Thompson was giving up reps with the 2s to Charles Wright. So the guy that you're starting quarterback, maybe for the rest of this season, really missed a big chunk of August working with the guys that he's working with now. And it does make some of the preparation for this season in August feel like it was wasted in my mind. That if Card's a guy that could have the plug pulled on him after 6.5 quarters, then the guy who was going to have the plug pulled for probably should have been given even more reps. There's no anticipation of this, is I guess what I'm saying. And there is a little, he gets credit for fixing this, but nothing about the lead up to what just happened suggests that they prepared well and getting Thompson the most amount of quality work that he could possibly get now that he may be the starter from here, moving on to the rest of the season.
So what are you getting at then?
I'm just saying.
I don't know what your pushback is.
I think Card got a lot more reps with I think the percentage, 10 practices, they had 30 practices. If you count 15 in the spring, 15 in the fall, and a third of those went to Card. So a 65-35 split, I think, proves your point that Thompson was with the ones a lot.
Now I'm talking to totality of the offseason.
No, I know, but I'm saying 30 practices is a lot of time to spend with your quarterbacks. It was a bit alarming that Sark, in retrospect, you're right, Anwar. All the things that you said going into the season proved to be correct. It doesn't feel like Sark had that same anticipation, and that they couldn't sense even a little bit that what happened on Saturday might loom over the horizon. It makes me shrug my shoulders a little bit. It's like he was so spooked. You know, there's the phrase of seeing ghosts as a quarterback. Usually that's something you talk about in the NFL, where they're seeing things that just don't exist. I think it was more than that. There was, as Alex said, there was such a hesitancy. If someone says, why couldn't they have seen this before? What kept them from being able to see this in such a way that it would keep them from allowing themselves to be in that position? I don't know what to tell them. They were not, Sark was not ready for what happened on Saturday, as evidenced by the fact that it took him so long to make the switch, even though players on the team of DeMarvion Overshone would say, we thought he was spooked. I forget what word he used on Monday, but it was like, oh, okay. That's problematic. It's just,
the whole thing is problematic because that team didn't look prepared for anything on all 3 phases of the ball, right? Whether it was, right, Alex, when we're talking offense, defense, special teams, like it was, if you're talking about shocking, it stretches past the Card thing. That if you talk about what's, you should say like, what the hell's going on? Each side, and to the defensive defense, I mean, the offense wasn't doing anything, so they held as long as they could, and then the second half it got poured on. But they punted maybe 2 times, I think, Arkansas, and then after that, they pretty much scored on every single drive. So, you've got a team. So I'm just bringing it all in.
Yeah.
The whole thing was, the Card thing is one aspect of a lack of preparation, a lack of anticipation in every area, because I don't think they anticipated anything going as south as it did. And the fact that they didn't have that ready. In fact, it's one of the worst losses when we start doing the math since what was it, 2016 or whatever the case may be. That part is shocking as well.
I think that the thing with what Kesha said, just back to Card, and we can move on after that. I mean, so he came in, so he played the 7th series, which was a 3-and-out after the half. And then in the 8th series, I don't know exactly what it was, but I do know that I have in my charting here that was the one where Carrick came in as a jumbo tight end. So that means they were down on the goal line on that one. I think they scored then, right?
That was after the
turnover.
DJ Foster interception.
Yeah,
yes.
After the turnover.
And so then he had the 9th series where that was a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 play drive. And then he came, and I guess he was just thinking maybe Hudson's getting something going because there's, we scored on the last series. Now we've had an 8-play drive. And then the 10th series is when he came in, and that's when there was the forward fumble, the forward throw fumble thing. And that's when he finally got, to me, it felt like maybe what Sark was doing was he was saying, let's wait to see what happens in the second half. Like now he's on the short leash. We'll give him the yank if there's a bad thing that comes up. It feels like to me, if that was your line of thinking, after the first 3-and-out, maybe after that 7th series, you take the guy out. But he was clearly giving him a little bit more leash than it seems like any of us would. I know that we were kind of talking in Slack over the course of the halftime, and I was just like, you got it. I mean, you got to bring Casey out after half, right? I mean, it felt like we were all kind of saying, like, that's what everybody was saying. Look at the board. People were saying it even before halftime. So clearly, I don't know why he gave him that level of leeway, but clearly Sark had it in his mind that he was going to give that level of leeway. And you said it was 6.5 quarters, Catch. It was closer to really 7 quarters.
Yeah.
That was really at the very end of the 3rd quarter when he finally pulled him out.
I guess, Jason, my biggest point was all offseason long, Texas fans they've been taking themselves from 8-4 to 9-3 because they are supposed to have an upgrading coaching staff. And Saturday, for as bad as the players played, it really fell on the coaches as well. That wasn't the stuff. People won't like that I'm saying this, but it's the thing 4 or 5 days later, it's kind of hard for me to shake. If Tom Herman had done what happened on Saturday, if that had been a Tom Herman production, there'd be hell have no fury, like a Texas fan base mad because they think Tom Herman was partly responsible for a loss. Saturday, somewhat, I don't want to it's not an overreaction Monday podcast, but there's a part of me that's like, if it doesn't work out, let me put it to you like this. If in 3 or 4 years there's a new coaching staff, we're going to look back and go, when was the first time you had doubts? When you thought to yourself, ooh, maybe this isn't what we thought it was going to be. We're going to point back to the Arkansas game when at every layer and level of preparation and the things that you need to win a ball game, they couldn't have gotten it more wrong.
Well, I think you've seen some of that if you're just going off of our message board. I mean, listen, I was the guy who almost a month ago when we picked who were we president of the fan club, I almost went with Sark, so I may not be the perfect person to ask, but you've seen some of that. I thought on the message board, like there were threads about in posts. Oh, Sark's not going to have it done. He's going to be gone in 3 years. He's going to be gone in 4 years. And you're right. I mean, it's a bit of an overreaction, but this was the first red flag. I mean, I would say he kind of used up his one mulligan with the fan base, with the media, probably. I mean, it kind of makes you step back and say, whoa, hey, maybe we'll see what happens moving forward. But that was certainly a pretty big red flag with the lack of preparation, the fact that he's kind of admitting he made the wrong quarterback choice. I mean, potentially we'll see what happens with Casey. Yeah, I mean, this to me, I said it before the game. I think I said it on this podcast last week. I think I was talking about something Almar said. I said, this to me feels like a must-win game. It felt like a must-win game for Texas in terms of recruiting, in terms of, you lost to a bottom feeder SEC team. You got your butt kicked. creates a lot of doubts, I think, within the fan base. And listen, I'm sure it's probably within the team a little bit too. Hey, what's going on with our coaching staff? Why were we so unprepared? Why did the players play so poorly? I mean, there's going to be a seed of doubt inside these players' heads about themselves, about their coaching staff. It's human nature. Certainly within the fans and the media. I mean, that's our job, is to be critical when it's time to be critical. There's a lot to nitpick about that game. You know, I'm sure they'll come out this week and they'll flex their muscles against Rice, and everybody be thumping their chest and saying how great, Texas is back. Well, no, we got to look forward a little bit and let's see what happens against TCU and Oklahoma. I'm not even going to count Tech too much, but that was a game all of us picked Texas to win. I don't think anybody, to your point earlier, you're saying, hey, why wasn't Sark more prepared for this in the quarterback situation? Why didn't he have a plan? Maybe, Sark's said, hey, he's kind of going with his gut feel. And I don't think anybody in their right mind expected what happened in Fayetteville to happen. Offensively, defensively, special teams mishaps, I mean, everything. So, I don't fault him for not having more of a clear plan. I don't think anybody thought Hudson Card was going to struggle the way he struggled and that game was going to completely go off the rails. Me, I'm more focused about moving forward. Let's see what they're going to do to get things corrected moving forward. But, I'm a big fan of Steve Sarkisian. I always have been. Before he got to Texas, I was a big fan of him. Obviously, what he's doing in Alabama was tremendous. I think he's a brilliant offensive-minded coach. But, the lack of preparation, what we saw last week, is a little bit alarming. The lack of offensive success, the lack of the subpar offensive line play. Sark has said, he said on Monday, hey, those guys will get better as they have more time together. Man, I'm not so sure. So, to me, they've got to make some kind of adjustments there. But this all ultimately falls on Steve Sarkisian. I mean, it's his job to have this team ready. It's his job to have this offense flowing smoothly. That's what he was brought in for. He's brought in to light up the scoreboard. I thought he was going to do it from game one. Last week was a big-time hiccup. And, I think you're right. If things don't improve and if things don't go well, be it 6 weeks from now or 3 years from now, this will be the game. That Arkansas game will be the one that we look back on and say, yeah, we probably should have seen it then. We probably should have seen it as early as week 2. I'm not expecting that, but if that's the way things unfold moving forward, yeah, that Arkansas game will be a major telling point.
And Catch, to your point, like, I just want to piggyback on this one. Once we get past Rice, but like you're talking about, Jay, there's that 3-game stretch where, as poorly as Texas Tech plays, we always know that Texas Tech gets up for Texas. Last year, they played, Houston Baptist or something like that, and barely beat them. And then basically Texas comes back and defies every odd and every math equation to go and come from behind to beat Tech. We know what TCU is going to represent, and we know what OU is going to represent. What Sarkisian has to be careful for in year one is that he can't take a step backwards, right? No one's going to want to hear in this situation, you got to bring in your guys, right? You just got to recruit Sarkisian guys. No one's going to want to hear that off of a team that won 7 games, right? They're just not going to want to hear that. A team that they won 7, no one's saying it was great, but if you play a full schedule, you have like a USF that's in there, Kansas is in there. So hell, if Kansas doesn't get canceled, that's probably, I'm assuming, an 8-win team. I mean, it's kind of, those games have been tricky. So
that was like a borderline 9-10 win team. Like that.
Correct.
Pretty good.
That's basically what you're inheriting, right? If the schedule is all the same, USF and Kansas are on your team, you're in that 9-win thing with LSU being a coin toss, right? So you can't take a step backwards. Like you can't jump from the Tom Herman and skip back to Charlie Strong. Like that's, Texas fans are not going to want to hear that in year one. So, whatever he needs to fine tune, they've got to treat Rice like their exhibition game. Those next 3 games will be very telling, because once you kind of get through that, I mean, if you could, OU is always kind of like that dividing line for us, right? We always kind of know where this team is headed after the OU game. But it just can't be guys are looking out of place. And the last thing, you definitely don't want opposing teams. And opposing teams will always talk shit, but you don't want opposing teams coming out and talking about how your guys quit. Like that, you can't have that being said about your team, especially in year one, because it will start raising way more question marks than answers. And that's not what he wants to do. That's a bad start.
Yeah. You've also had Arkansas players saying they knew what the other team was going to do. Like they knew what Texas was going to do before they did it. Again, that's some stuff that we've heard before. It's not like, oh man, that's a weird thing to hear. It's no, that's been said before. Anwar, I want to stay with you. And guys, I'm going to kind of just go, Alex, you'll be next. And Jason, you can ask the question last. Take the quarterbacks out of the equation and project forward for the next 10 games. When I ask you the most concerning thing from Saturday that you worry about the rest of the season over the course of this schedule, a lot of problematic things in that game against Arkansas. Is there one, as you look for the rest of the schedule, that you just say to yourself, that could be a thing that just never goes away?
Gosh, there's so many. I mean, I don't know which side of the equation. I know where Alex will go, so I'll let him go with his. I already know where Alex is going, right? He'll go O-line. The defense was definitely concerning to me because the quarterback that they played is not all world. You know what I'm saying? Like if you look at his numbers versus Rice, it was pretty mediocre. He did good from a rushing standpoint. The breakdowns that we saw that we didn't see against Louisiana, and just being out of position a lot of times. And the thing that was really concerning, what they saw, the players started talking about, there was a lack of communication that occurred. Again, you talk about we've heard that before, but Moro Ojomo on Monday was talking about there was just a lack of communication that occurred. And one of the things that he said was, hey, we just got to get these young guys like on the same page. The young guys on deep, we got to get. And I started thinking as he was talking, I was like, what young guys is he talking about? These are all older guys. Everyone on defense, for the most part, is an older guy. And he talked about, well, they just got to talk more to each other and communicate more with each other and make sure they're on the same page every single snap. There's no such thing as over communication. And I just thought, from a veteran team, if we're having those kind of problems to start, so that's the thing that's concerning to me, is this defense, especially once you start getting into the Big 12.
Alex, what about you? Is it as simple as Anwar thinks? She'll just say the offensive line because you just spent a couple of days vomiting over it?
Yeah. I'll tell you what, and here's the thing. I'm not worried about Keandre Coburn playing so badly to start the season. I think he'll turn it around, and I'm not that worried. But the interior defensive line, it was supposed to be the sort of the bedrock of the defense, maybe one of the kind of bedrocks of the team, and they just have not been very effective. I'm not worried, though. I'm pretty sure that gets turned around with the offense, and just in general, just the decision-making of the coaches with the personnel. I mean, look, they're the coaches. I'm not the coach, but I do a lot of work. I've documented 8 years of this team, charted every play by every player. And it's become clear to me that there's some decisions, like even before I even get to the offense, on the defensive side of the football, they keep running out Ray Thornton over Ovi, which makes no sense based on the production levels of those two guys. They on offense, they're saying that in basically the opposite of what Sarkisian did with making the move to Casey Thompson after seeing something, realizing it, understanding it, addressing it, just getting it done with. Onward. What does that Florida AD of yours always say?
Whatever needs to be done, inevitably needs to be done immediately.
Yes, I love that thing, and I can never remember it exactly right. But
Jeremy Foley.
But I love that thing from Mr. Foley, and it's like it's inevitable that Denzel Okafor needs out of this starting offensive line. It's inevitable. So it should be done immediately. Sarkisian said that keeping the current starting five that they have in there right now is what he thinks is important to get them, I guess, their reps together, or get them, maybe he feels like it's something where they need to kind of congeal as an offense and really come together. But man, this offensive line was bad first and foremost in this game because Texas is not running out the best five for the job currently. I mean, I've been saying it about Okafor for now 2-3 years. He hasn't been good. I mean, his awareness is bad. His feet are slow. He's too stiff. It's just, I'm sorry, man. At this point, he needs out, and you got guys who can do it. You have things that you can do to mix this thing up. You know, even Christian Jones has been a little bit of a, I don't want to say it's an indictment on Coach Flood just yet, but he hasn't developed very well from the spring through fall camp, through 2 games. He has not been good. At a certain point, you take that and you take the fact that Coach Flood isn't getting in the best guy. Like, we can all see it, right? There needs to be a change with some personnel along the offensive line. I don't care what it is. Put in Hayden Connor, bump Kerstetter down to center, get Andre Carrick in. Just do something. Like, let's see if we can get a spark going here, right? Let's see if we can get this thing to where it's to where we're operating in an efficient way, to where it's not just constantly teetering on the edge of acceptability like it has been. You take those 2 things together with Coach Flood, and I'm not throwing in the towel on Coach Flood. I think he's I've seen him in practice. He looks like a great teacher. I love his clinics. We've seen what he's done in Alabama, yada, yada, yada. But at some point you got to say, what's happening here? Like, why is there not even maybe just some tinkering along the, put Connor in for, a series or 2 instead of Okafor. See how things look. Get Carrick in there over instead of Christian Jones. See how things look, At the point when Jake Majors in this game, I mean, he played really poorly in this game, and a lot of it was mental. And when you have a guy like Jake Majors, who isn't necessarily going to generate a whole bunch of movement off the offensive line due to the fact at this point in career, he's not as strong as he's going to eventually be. I think he'll eventually be really good and strong and great and be able to generate some of that movement. But right now you like him because he's so smart and he's heady and he doesn't make these mistakes. And he just made mistake after mistake. And you just wonder what's going on. What is happening with these guys? So yeah, it's a worry, you wonder, I mean, of all the offensive line stuff that I've done, we've seen ebbs and flows throughout the course of a season, but it generally has to do with like a starter being hurt or, some dude, having to move around or something. It isn't like you got the same guys, and this just feels like it's not getting any better. It's getting worse. Out of this game today, or this game this week, Christian Jones allowed a TFL and a pressure. Denzel Okafor allowed a TFL, a sack, and a false start penalty. Jake Majors allowed 3 quarterback pressures, 2 tackles for a loss, 1 run stuff, and 1 sack. And then Junior Angelau allowed 1 TFL. And then Derek Kerstetter allowed 2 quarterback pressures, 1 quarterback hit, and one run stuff. So that's not an offensive line that's performing at any level. In fact, it was the worst performance that I've ever charted or graded doing this, except for the TCU game in 2017. That game started Derek Kerstetter. Or here's what that game was. And if you guys don't remember that game, Ketchum remembers it. That was a 24-7 loss to TCU in Tom Herman's first year, where Texas fell to 4-5. And basically at that point in time, Tom Herman had to change the narrative with the fan base to saying, look, come out and support this team just so we can goddamn stay bowl eligible. Right. That was that. Okay. So that team was starting left tackle because by this point, Connor Williams had been hurt, and Connor Williams was hurt after the San Jose State game, remember? And Patrick Vahe was on his way to being hurt for the rest of the season. He was playing injured in this game. And Zach Shackelford had been injured the week before. So we had Terrell Cuny playing at center. Here's how that game went. Tristan Nicholson at left tackle gave up 2 pressures, 2 quarterback hits, and 1 sack. Patrick Vahe at left guard playing injured gave up 3 pressures. Terrell Cuny playing at center gave up 4 pressures, 2 TFLs, and 1 sack. Jake McMillan gave up 2 pressures, 2 quarterback hits, 1 sack, 1 run stuff, and 1 TFL. And Derek Kerstetter allowed 3 pressures, 2 sacks, and a TFL. So that was the worst game that I've ever watched of this Texas offensive line. The offensive line performance dating back to 2013. The offensive line performance that I saw on Saturday was the second worst. And so, of course, it's very worrisome.
Other than that, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln? Jason, we've heard a lot now. Is there anything different or anything you want to add on to that?
I'm going to go back to what you talked about a little bit ago, Ketch. You had Arkansas players saying Texas quit. Anwar, when you were talking about what Moro Ojomo said on Monday, you got to communicate better. And then I hear Serenity talk to one of the players who said that Sark said, hey, you can't let Arkansas beat you twice. And all this I'm hearing, I'm like, this is deja vu, just deja vu, deja vu. We keep hearing these same issues no matter who the coach is. I swear, I just think something's broken in this program. I don't know if it's that Texas players are so coddled. I know that's a word that people don't want to hear, but even as high school players, they are. But when I hear in game 2, basically there's Arkansas is saying Texas was soft and we broke them and they quit in the third quarter of that game. Something mentally is broken in this program, and it doesn't seem to matter who is coaching. It's the same thing. This team gets punched in the mouth and faces some adversity and can't battle back. This program. My thinking coming into this year is Steve Sarkisian is talented enough, and he will scheme around this where there will be enough success. He's talented enough and smart enough that he can cover up some of these mental weaknesses, if you will, with better schemes, and Texas will be able to battle back and race up and down the field. Well, we certainly didn't see that in week 2. My biggest concern is the mental makeup of this program. Is it tough enough when it faces adversity in a couple weeks against TCU? When Oklahoma jumps out to a 13-3 lead, but something like that, is this team going to be able to battle back, or is it going to just fold up its tent and just try to get through the fourth quarter and not get blown out too badly? I have real concerns about the mental makeup of this program. And that's pretty harsh, I know, after 2 games and 2 games of the season, 2 games under a new coaching staff. But to me, it just feels like a lot of the same stuff I've heard and I've seen and we've talked about before is, does this team have the fortitude to battle back when it's faced with some adversity? It certainly didn't against Arkansas. In the things I'm hearing from players and coaches, and I'm like, it sure sounds like the same stuff we've heard under Tom Herman, under Charlie Strong, when things weren't going well under Mac. It's a lot of the same things we've heard. So what's to make me think it's going to be a different outcome? So, yeah, I have real concerns. Obviously, the offensive line, like Alex said, is an obvious one. Anwar, the defense didn't play well. That's a good one too. But to me, it's more about the mental makeup. If this team can just has that junkyard dog mentality to go out and fight every single week and get it done, especially when it's faced with adversity, I have real concerns about that.
But that's why I go back to just Jason, just why the program can't take a step backwards, because that's going back to the Charlie Strong days. We just talked about the Texas Tech thing where you had a 1% chance of this team coming back. And they found a way to scrap back into a game that they should not have, or where there was the Oklahoma State game, whether it was last year or the year before that they found a way to scrap back and get back into. We've seen them kind of get tougher over the last couple of years. So that's where you can't go back to 4 or 5 years ago where this team was in a bad place where it wasn't as mentally tough.
Want to look ahead to Rice for a little bit, because it really is, before we go into parting shots. So we'll change our directions a little bit. Anwar, I'll come back to you. What makes for a successful Saturday against Rice? Because people now we're at that point, until Texas plays probably TCU, the fans now will be dismissive of anything. Like that Saturday was such a bad loss that if they beat Rice 73-0, you'll still have some miserable sons of bitches on the message board. Like, on some level, you won't be able to make people happy no matter what happens. So that acknowledgement out of the way, what's a good Saturday for Texas?
73 zip.
That's all it takes.
Alex.
Okay.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Seeing an, I think Alex is right, and seeing an ass whooping, I think would make Texas fans feel a lot better. They can't have an Arkansas Rice kind of game. Like, you want to talk about meltdowns, be tied 17 going into the fourth quarter against.
Oh
Rice. God. I mean,
oh God.
And it's a night game, isn't it? So people are
already drunk.
People will be drunk. Yeah.
God.
So it's got to be from start to finish they've got to treat Rice like it's Rice. Like the only thing that should be entertaining from a Rice perspective should be their band. Like that should be the only thing that you're looking at and be like, well, look how creative these guys are. They're kind of doing a dig on Texas. Like that should be it. Because if it's not an ass kicking of epic proportions, Sarky, it's not good. It's not good for the fan base. It's not going to help recruiting. It's not going to help to keep the elite guys. So I think they've just got to see an ass kicking. Period.
Jason, same question for you. Other than 73-0, what makes for a good Saturday?
Yeah, clean game, dominant on both sides of the ball. I need to see this defensive line do something. I get so much shit in my matchups every week when I gave Arkansas the edge. I gave Louisiana the edge, their offensive line against this Texas defensive line. I know there's talent there and I know there's depth there, but I need to see it before I'm going to start giving. I did give Texas the edge against Rice because I think I said it's Rice. I mean, come on. But Texas needs to dominate this game, like Anwar said, from the jump. I mean, it's a little bit interesting. I mean, Rice played Arkansas tougher than Texas did. Then they get their asses kicked by Houston last week. I mean, this is still a Rice team that should not even be in the same stratosphere as Texas. So if this game's remotely close in the third quarter, I'm talking if it's even 2 scores in the third quarter, if it's Texas 27-13 or 27-14, that's not a good sign for me for Texas moving forward. This game at halftime needs to be 28-3 or something like that. Texas needs to have this game put away by the half. I mean, if you're a Texas fan, you want to see great things from Casey Thompson. You need to see great things from Casey Thompson because you can say, okay, hold on, maybe that's what we can look forward to against when it's going to matter in the Big 12 play. If you're a Texas fan, I think you need to see Texas put this game away early. You need to see them dominate in the trenches on both sides of the ball. They've got to start to get that figured out. And I said it in my matchups. I said, if it doesn't happen against Rice, if this offensive line and defensive line doesn't win those battles against Rice, it's never going to happen all year. And you want to see good quarterback play from Casey Thompson. You do that, I think you can come out of this game thinking, okay, hey, maybe this is a little bit of a different team with Casey Thompson leading the charge. It seemed to spark everything and everybody. I get it, it's Rice, but they did what a good team should do against Rice. Maybe that gives you some confidence in this team moving forward into Big 12 play.
Alex, I guess I'll ask you the same version of the question, but as someone who will be doing the film review next week, what would make it an infinitely more enjoyable process?
If Texas just ran the ball, ran it down their throat, and just milked the clock the whole time, just not so many plays, not so many passes. But no, I would say, man, it's real simple for me. Like, I think that Texas fans will be happy if they see a Texas team on Saturday that comes out and just they see dominance, and not just dominance, but dominance that goes along with confidence that's like bordering on cockiness, right? Just a dominant, confident, almost cocky game where they're having a ton of fun and they are completely dominating. That's what they need to do.
All right. Well, we'll go into parting shots with one eye on getting us out of here at a reasonable time. Plus, I got to be honest, this is a depressing podcast, or modcast. The idea that maybe I just haven't I know I haven't done what Alex has done, which is review I went back and watched this a second time on Sunday morning, and then it was gone. Don't need to watch it anymore. I've almost forgotten 5 days later just how brutal Saturday was, but you know what? That's what that's what the aftermath and discussion of 3 touchdown losses look like. To Tom Herman's credit, we haven't done a lot of those, Anwar, over the course of the last few years. Boy, I think I'd have paid $100 for Tom Herman's deep down secret thoughts on Saturday night. I know he had to feel like, yeah, that's what you guys get for getting rid of me. I'm sure there was a lot more where that came from, but it was kind of a throwback to the Charlie Strong era in a way that we knew we weren't going to get Tom Herman football anymore, but boy, be careful what you ask for sometimes. Parting shots.
Tom drinking his little Tito's in his Chicago loft somewhere. I don't know.
Another cockamamie has a bunch of fans talking about how cockamamie that offense is.
Hey, the Bears didn't look so hot themselves on Sunday. So
No.
But he is an analyst though, so he's just doing paperwork and collecting checks from UT at this point.
Doesn't sound terrible. Parting shots. Anwar, you want to lead us off with anything?
Yeah, I know that we were a little bit down and stuff like that, but I think if you're a Texas fan, I think, look, if you believe that Sarkisian was the guy a couple of weeks ago, you still got to have your faith in him. You still got to have and believe that he's going to be the guy that can do it. And so if you believe that he was making a smart decision by starting Hudson Card, I think you got to apply the same thing to the Casey Thompson situation and hope that Casey comes out, does what we've seen him do. Now, I think you have realistic expectations that Casey is not going to score in every single play. He scored out of 9 out of his last 10 drives, 7 touchdowns and 2 field goals. So that's not going to be sustainable going forward. But, I think if you are a Texas fan and having some hope, you got to hope that Steve Sarkisian is still the quarterback whisperer. Steve Sarkisian is still the guy that has a long history of making quarterbacks look good. And now you got to hope that he can apply that fairy dust and sprinkle some fairy dust on some Casey. Talk about things we've heard in the past. Sprinkle some fairy dust on Casey Thompson and get this team back to what your expectations were before the season. So, for me, everything is going to be, for the game is going to be focusing on Casey doing the little things, moving around the pocket. We know the offensive line isn't that good. So you're going to have a quarterback that's got to be able to do 2 things, move around in that pocket a little bit, and then be decisive when it's time to run. Also, the third thing, which is if they're going to drop so many, be able to throw it above the linebacker's head and have it get there before the safety does. So for me, it's going to be everything focusing on Casey going forward. And I think you're a Texas fan. You got to go all chips in. The same way you went all chips in on Hudson, you got to go all chips in on Casey because if he fails and you have to do another quarterback change, this season is going off the rails and you're not going to like any of these podcasts going forward. So that's going to be my parting shot. Looking forward to see what Casey can do this upcoming weekend.
Jason, what about you? Parting shot, recruiting related, where you headed?
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm headed. And if you've seen my eyes kind of diverted a lot during this podcast, I apologize. I've been texting and DMing and things as we're recording, but home game for Texas. Not a big, it's kind of a weirdly quiet recruiting week, being that it's a home game. Of course, Texas has had a run of commitments, but Brennan Thompson, the speedster out of Spearman, Texas, wide receiver, chatting with his coach and his I got my cell phone over here and my DMs over here on my right, but chatting with both of them. He is coming in this weekend for his official visit. He's down to Texas, Oklahoma State, and Texas A&M. So we've seen Texas loading up on defensive players of late, and everybody's saying, what's going on with offensive recruiting, and more specifically offensive line, of course. But, Brennan Thompson will be in on his official visit this weekend. Gives Texas a chance to really potentially make a move there with a key target. He's the kind of weapon that Steve Sarkisian needs in his offense. He's got a little bit Xavier Worthy to him with his speed. Him and Evan Stewart. Texas would love to land both of those guys at the receiver position. So not a big weekend in terms of numbers of recruits I'm expecting at the game, but a big weekend having Brennan Thompson in Austin on his official visit. And we'll be checking with him coming out of the weekend. Brennan's pretty quiet, actually. He's gone completely silent, but I'll check with his coach, his trainer, coming out of the weekend to try to get a vibe on where Texas stands after this official visit. Like I said, he's down to 3: Texas, Texas A&M, Oklahoma State. Tough kid to read. I don't really have a vibe on where he's leaning right now, but maybe Texas can change that this weekend.
Mr. Dunlap, parting shot?
Well, I just figured I'd say one kind of good thing about the team coming out of this game, or just something kind of interesting, is, and some of these NIL videos, Catch, that you've put together, and Serenity does a great job with those here on the YouTube channel. If you haven't checked them out, check them out. One of the insights that we got from some of the guys on defense was talking about Byron Murphy, the nose tackle, the freshman, and it turns out he's been the best. He's been the most effective nose tackle that Texas has so far this season. Can you believe he's only played 29 snaps and he's doubling his nearest competition as far as run stuffs this year. Whenever he gets in there, man, that guy's dynamite. He's a fire plug, dude. So I would just say, keep an eye out for 90. He should probably be getting more playing time. And Tavondre Sweat's been good too. It's been just a little bit of a weird deal for Keandre Coburn. So hopefully those guys continue to turn it up. But I mean, I think that's a good sign, like it's so, we always talk about how important it is, like to be like one of the Nick Sabans of the world as far as recruiting. You need to be able to identify these, keep a good pipeline of these young interior defensive linemen, and Byron Murphy is looking like he's going to be a good one. And my other thing I just wanted to show you guys, check this out. If you're listening to this on the podcast, you won't be able to hear it. Maybe you won't even be able to see it, but look at what one of my neighbors took a picture of. The crawl. Can you see that? They crawled up to this gas station that's up on the top.
Put it down a little bit. There you go.
Can you see it? You can't.
It's
see
a cat.
It's a giant. It's a mature. It's a mature
bobcat?
mountain lion. Is just. I wish you could see him. See how big his neck is and his stomach and everything.
Oh yeah, there you go. Oh my God.
There you go.
Yeah, I couldn't believe he crept out onto the gas station where all those lights are and everything. I mean, they're scared to death of humans. So we got that going. We got that going on in the hood.
I was like, oh, a little kitty cat.
Yeah, my wife's a little freaked out letting the kids go ride their bikes in the front yard after seeing that pop up on her Facebook feed last night. But anyway, yeah, just excited about another big weekend of football, man, and just happy to be here.
My final parting shots. Number one, I was going to say, everybody's got to chill out about the quarterback thing now. I said this on Monday after the parting shot, but what can't happen on Saturday is if Casey Thompson makes a mistake, everybody does the old Chris Sims Major Applewhite thing and immediately looks to the backup. And now you're reading remember when Chance Mock had his body language read on national television because Vince, like Applewhite told a joke or something on the sideline when Sims threw an interception, and it was like everybody's just going crazy. The best thing that can happen now is that everybody gets behind Casey Thompson, and when he makes a mistake, they've got to give him the breath to make another, because if this football season turns into a steady diet of when the quarterbacks make mistakes, and you'd probably say the one thing that maybe I can't figure out if it was a good thing or a bad thing. Card wasn't throwing the ball into other people's hands. And maybe if he had, he would have gotten pulled earlier, but that's going to happen. Like, Casey Thompson turned the ball over in camp. He's probably going to make some turnovers occasionally as a starting quarterback. It would be best for the Texas football team if the fan base can kind of get over its nervousness with the quarterbacks. Maybe treat it like, I don't know, the whole thing's gone sideways in the way that they anticipated this thing going, and it can't be chaos for the next 10 games, or this is going to be a very forgettable season for all of really bad, forgettable reasons. My only other parting shot that I wanted to say was I'm starting to feel better, Anwar. Like nice. Today is the first day that I feel halfway normal. And it's been a couple of weeks, and I still have a son that's got like a 102 temperature, and we just cannot break the damn fever. And my wife has been sick, and my daughter hasn't been sick. So I'm anticipating once everybody gets to feeling better, she's next. Mm-hmm. But for those of you who sent me messages and emails and just thought it inside your head, I hope Catch feels a little bit better. Today, I feel a little bit better. And hopefully this is the beginning of getting out of this cold flu sickness thing. We even took COVID tests again yesterday just to make sure that we weren't wrong on that. So anyway, feeling a little bit better, which is good, because when those Saturday post-game shows roll around, they take a lot out of you after you've done an hour and a half and people are going crazy. By the time Anwar and I are done, it's like, can I find a bed somewhere? But look, anyway, that's it for me. For Alex, Jason, Anwar, the whole group, thank you for hanging in during the Orangebloods Modcast again. Shout out to our guys over at Pimp the T-Shirt again, real quick, Anwar. Rogue Apothecary, not the official sponsor of this podcast, the unofficial sponsor of this week's podcast. Guys, thanks for hooking us up. We will see you on the channel soon. Thank you. Take care of each other. Bye-bye.